We're back. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is our buys and sells episode. We just had the trade deadline pass. Okay, this is Faraz. I'm here with Zach. We have a little guest too. We have a guest. Halloween is over. We're done. This weekend, as a parent to two little kids on Halloween, it's done. All right, Halloween's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, so I'm ready to focus on Thanksgiving. We're moving forward. All right, I'm like Bill Belichick. When you're asking me about Christmas, listen, we're on to Thanksgiving. Okay, don't ask me about Christmas right now. Okay, we also had a major shakeup to a team overnight, and we'll get there. But first, we have a guest. It's me, it's Zach, and we have a friend, Christian Catenacci from Catch the Blitz, with us here as well. If you don't know, Catch the Blitz provides awesome NFL content on Instagram at Catch the Blitz, and through their podcast, Catch the Blitz. It's called the CTB Show. Okay, look for that. All right, that drops early on in the week. He recaps and previews every single week. Christian, welcome to the show.
What's going on, guys? Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Of course, man. I want to hit the news that just dropped overnight for us East Coast folks. Josh McDaniels fired from his head coaching position of the Las Vegas Raiders. He is done. They also fired their offensive coordinator. They fired their GM. They are cleaning house. Okay. Josh McDaniels now has two pretty unsuccessful stints as a head coach. The previous job with the Denver Broncos. Former Giants linebacker Antonio Pierce is now the Raiders interim head coach. It's kind of weird for me seeing him up there like that, but they're going to make the switch also to QB Aiden O'Connell, rookie quarterback, after the debacle that we saw on Monday night. DeVonta Adams, Josh Jacobs, Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer. All these guys need saving right now. Christian, let me ask you first. Do you think that we can see a potential positive impact for this team at all moving forward? And what do you make of these like fantasy relevant players that I just mentioned?
To be honest with you, I thought this was all long overdue. I think, again, I didn't understand the hiring when it happened in the first place. But it was clear just Josh McDaniels wasn't getting his message out to that locker room. And again, like you mentioned before, this is the second time that we've seen it happen. Is it going to be his last time as a head coach, or at least getting a chance to be a head coach? I think it might be, which is crazy because he's still pretty young, right? But I mean, we've seen two now with Denver and now with the Raiders. We've seen two complete debacles of coaching jobs, and it sort of happened both the same way, right? He just was not it for the locker room. His message wasn't clear. It was clearly not getting across. There was a just look at the players. Look at the way that DeVonta Adams, a veteran in this league, reacts, and right, like if he's reacting like that on the sideline, say what you want about the quarterback, I think it's shows more about the head coach and the fact that he just simply lost the locker room, right? And I think it's been, again, long overdue. So going to its fantasy impact, I think there's a positive impact, to be honest. I think it's fresh, rejuvenated energy, especially with a young rookie quarterback coming in. Again, is Aiden O'Connell going to come up and light up the stat sheet? Probably not. But I think from a fantasy perspective, it's almost a positive because, again, it can't get Jimmy Garoppolo. It's not like Jimmy Garoppolo was playing as a must-start quarterback, or he wasn't doing his receivers any favors, right? We saw what he's done outside of Jacoby Myers. There really wasn't anything special, and he had Devontae Adams outside of him. But Aiden O'Connell, I think he's fresh juice, a new interim head coach, gives this team new rejuvenated energy, less of a, I want to say, I think it's less pressure too, because now it's like, okay, the season's not necessarily a shoo-in, but it's just fresh energy. And I think for guys like Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams, and Jacoby Myers, I almost give them a slight uptick, which is crazy because they're going from Jimmy Garoppolo to Aiden O'Connell, and a rookie that wasn't really drafted that high, and he doesn't have the pedigree that Jimmy Garoppolo has. But I think if you take what goes on behind the scenes, I almost think it's a positive.
Zach, in O'Connell's Week 4 start earlier this year against the Chargers, he wasn't bad, right? Josh Jacobs had a huge game. Given the fact that O'Connell was like just checking it down a ton. 8 catches for 81 yards for Jacobs, so he would potentially get a huge boost if that continues. Devonta Adams went 8 for 75 on 13 targets. That was his second highest target share of the year. Or I'm sorry, target total of the year, I should say. And that's solid considering what we've seen over the last 4 games, right? That was his last good game, by the way, right? Like with Aiden O'Connell. But Jacoby Myers was the odd man left out in that game. 2 catches for 33 yards on only 4 targets. They had the Giants this week. We're starting Devontae Adams. You know, you got to have him in your lineup regardless. We're starting Josh Jacobs, but are we rolling out Myers as a wide receiver too?
I think this week there's something to be worried about. There's definitely concern to have because Aiden O'Connell didn't target him very well in that game. But I think in the long term, like Christian was mentioning before, like I think this could be a positive. It maybe not a positive, but a point where it's like we're going to see similar production moving forward. Like the game against Detroit, objectively, was very bad. I don't think the Raiders they're gonna watch. They're not gonna wash that taste out of our mouths anytime soon. But I do also think that the Raiders can be a lot better the rest of the way than they showed Monday night. Like for everything that went wrong, I think that was just a total failure on offense in all phases. And I'm going to give them credit. The Lions are a good team. They're a good defense. All right. I'm not going to just completely hang this all on like Jimmy Garoppolo's shoulders, even though he was the problem Monday night with Josh McDaniels, all that. They're addressing those issues. The only way to go from Monday night is up, right? The reality is, before that debacle, like you mentioned, Myers, he was a real fantasy wide receiver 1 in PPR points per game. Weeks 1 through 7, he was a wide receiver 12. So I think he's still a wide receiver 2 moving forward. I'm not going to let one really bad game define Myers for the rest of the season. Now, the Raiders are going to be putting O'Connell in at quarterback. He might be for the immediate future their quarterback, the guy under center. But in week 4 against the Chargers, he had that bad target share. Look at the game against the Bears when he came in at the end of the game. He threw 1 touchdown. It went to who? Jacoby Myers. So I think that there's not enough here for us to just suddenly panic about Jacoby Myers. Myers has shown that he can compete with Devontae Adams for targets, even though I still don't think that should be happening. I like Jacoby Myers, but Devontae Adams needs to get those targets. I think that can be corrected with the new coaching system coming in. Jimmy G, he was targeting his receivers at a high rate the first couple weeks of the season. He got injured. There was a little bit of turnover. It's hard to really buy into anything that we've seen these past couple weeks because it's just been terrible. I think there is room for improvement here from what we've seen. I don't think that he's going to be Jacoby Myers out of the wide receiver 2 conversation every single week. I think he definitely takes a little bit of a hit. This offensive line is still pretty bad. A big part of the reason why the Raiders struggled against the Lions was the pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo. And the same thing happened with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback in week 4, like you mentioned. Khalil Mack had 6 sacks. This could easily become a situation where the Raiders, I think, ride the hot hand. And we see Garoppolo a couple games maybe down the line, O'Connell a couple games down the line. But I think that the offense is going to be better than what we saw last night. I think it's easy to overreact and say that this is just the end of Jacoby Myers as a fantasy wide receiver. I don't think that's the case. I think he still has a couple wide receiver 2 weeks in him. But this week, I think I'm going to temper expectations. I'm probably going to rank him outside the top 24, given all the turnover that's happened these past 24 hours.
It makes sense. I mean, he does line up on the right perimeter on most of his routes, and the Giants have given up the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers on that right side over the last 4 weeks, the 5th most for the season. So it's a good matchup for him. But again, this was a relatively decent matchup this past week as well. So we'll see what happens. What we see a lot of the times with rookie quarterbacks is that they don't make it past their first read, right? But also, it seemed like if it wasn't Devontae Adams, it was like dumped down to Josh Jacobs, right? Myers has been the first read on 29% of passing plays this year with, overall, and Adams was at 41%. With O'Connell in week 4, it was only 16% for Myers, and Adams went all the way up to 50%. Okay, so I think Myers can have his weeks, but it's very possible he takes a real hit here, right? So coming into Monday night, he had 4 finishes inside the top 13, as you alluded to, Zach. Not sure we'll see a whole lot of that moving forward, but we'll see. Maybe in those games that Jimmy G comes back in for, possibly. Devontae Adams has had 1 fantasy wide receiver finish on the year, meaning top 12 finish on the year. Okay, 1. Jacoby Myers has had 4. Okay, so we've been ranking him as a wide receiver 1 this entire time. Are we going to see those wide receiver 1 days again? And if so, does that mean that we have to buy Devontae Adams right now, Christian?
I mean, I don't. The word buy is it's like you're walking on a tightrope, right? It depends what the asking price is, because again, Devontae Adams still holds a ton of name value and just pure name value, right? So it ultimately depends on what you're paying for him. Are you buying Devontae Adams and you're paying like you're trading for a wide receiver one, like an elite wide receiver one, I say even top 10 wide receiver one, I don't know if I would necessarily call him a buy if that's what you're paying from a price standpoint. But if you can get Devontae Adams for, let's say, a wide receiver 2 price, where you're trading for a guy who, I mean, he's not even a top 20 receiver on the year, but you get what I'm saying. Like, if you can get him at, I don't want to call it a discount because it's still expensive. You're still trading for Devontae Adams, right? You're not going to get Devontae Adams if his name wasn't involved here, right? Most likely you're probably trading for a guy that you could just throw in almost. But it's Devontae Adams, so people are holding onto the name value. With that being said, I would consider him a buy if you can get him relatively cheap. And I'm talking like you're trading for a top 20 to 25 receiver, right?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I don't think you have to give up wide receiver one prices at this point for Devontae
No.
Adams, right? Because Aiden O'Connell's coming in, and we're not sure. A lot of people. There's a lot of people aren't happy. If they had Devontae Adams this year, they were not happy because they drafted this player in the second round, and he did not come through straight up.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's his fault or not, right? Like, it is what it is, and they could be trying to cut their losses at this point. Okay. A little bit of news that just dropped. Taylor Heinicke has been named the starter for the Falcons.
Wow.
I'm trying to see right now if it's just for this week. Knowing Arthur Smith, I can't imagine that he's going to tell you guys, like, hey, Arthur Smith explained the decision to go with Taylor Heinicke after saying on Sunday that they didn't bench Desmond Ridder because of performance. But yeah, for this week against the Vikings, it is going to be Taylor Heinicke. And you know what that means? That basically means that you have a new potential screamer because it is a pretty good matchup for Taylor Heinicke, and like he has the weapons. Drake London is dealing with a groin injury right now, so we'll see what his practice statuses are throughout the week. But when he's healthy, I kind of feel like this is an upgrade for him, right? When he did have a wide receiver one in Terry McLaurin last year, right? And Terry McLaurin, if I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at it right now, he averaged 15.6 fantasy points with Heinicke last year. So not bad at all, right? So London could get an upgrade here. This offense can get an upgrade. This passing offense can get an upgrade. The accuracy was a real issue for Desmond Ridder. Just real quick, 30 seconds on this real quick, Christian. What are your thoughts on this move? Do you think this improves the Falcons' offense, number one? And number two, do we have a little bit more fantasy relevance out of this team?
100%. Absolutely. You saw in just his short stint when he came in last week. It just feels like, I mean, which is crazy to say because Desmond Ridder hasn't been bad, but like you watch the Falcons and you feel like there's so much left on the table with a roster. I mean, say what you want about the head coach, but I think from a quarterback standpoint, and we're talking fantasy upgrades to Kyle Pitts and Drake London, I think they do get an upgrade, right? You saw in just a short stint, he started targeting Kyle Pitts more. He was pushing the ball downfield. I think that's what you need when you're looking at a fantasy quarterback and fantasy offenses. I would give them an uptick 100%. He just feels like he's more comfortable back there, and he's throwing the ball with much more confidence as opposed to Desmond Ridder. You just didn't see the ball being pushed downfield as much as you'd like.
Yeah, I hear that. What are your thoughts, Zach? Is there one clear winner from here, from this team that would get benefit?
I don't know. I think they definitely get upgrades, but I think it's like Christian was alluding to. It's just kind of overall, everybody gets a slight uptick. I don't think there's any clear winner here. I do think that the talent levels of Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ridder are kind of like right there with each other. I don't know how much there's going to be a change because the philosophy on offense is still going to be that Arthur Smith offense. I think that the running backs are still going to be pretty involved. But the thing for me that makes me a little bit more optimistic is maybe Taylor Heinicke can limit turnovers because that's the problem. That's what we've seen from Desmond Ridder so far. 2 weeks ago, it was 3 fumbles in the game. The week before that, it was 3 interceptions in the game. He's had a turnover issue this season, and that's cutting drives short. So if the Falcons can get a little consistency, a little stability, not turning the ball over, extend drives as opposed to ending them early, I think we could see more fantasy relevance out of these guys. I think that's where some of the production might come from. Obviously, that's like a broad look at it, but I think that just even cutting down on the turnovers a little bit, which has been Desmond Ridder's game throughout this season so far, I think that could be a really big boost for a couple of these guys, namely Drake London and Kyle Pitts.
Ridder is leading the NFL in turnovers right now among all quarterbacks. All right, let's address this Vikings situation with Kirk Cousins going down. They traded for Josh Dobbs to come in and help them stay afloat. They're 4-4 right now, right? This move kind of tells us that they're not packing it in, right? They're not. I'm not saying that Dobbs is the savior, but we at least know that we have a capable quarterback coming in who kept Hollywood Brown very fantasy relevant, gave Trey McBride the tight end one finish of the week this past week. How much of a downgrade should we expect for this Vikings offense, Christian?
It's a downgrade for sure because again, Kirk Cousins, you look at his stats, he was having a fantastic year, right? He was one of the better quarterbacks overall from a statistic standpoint in the NFL. But I do like this move, to be honest. I alluded to it as a possibility when we recorded our show on Monday. I said, you know what? I just can't help to see the Vikings not trading for Josh Dobbs, especially after they came out and said, "Oh, we're going to start Kyler Murray or Clayton Tune." I was like, this sort of feels like they're leading towards trading him at the deadline, this was Monday, obviously, and the deadline just passed. But I do think it saves a lot of seasons. I really do. I think you're talking about potentially turning into a disaster for TJ Hawkinson, guys like Jordan Addison, and guys like Justin Jefferson, who obviously will produce, but let's say he comes back. If they were going with Jaren Hall, let's be real here. Justin Jefferson, which is crazy to say, I don't even know if I would feel comfortable rolling him out as one of my two receivers, and if you're starting two, let's say. But I think it does save a lot of seasons. You look at Josh Dobbs, look at Arizona's offense this year. He has Marquise Brown as a top 22 receiver. He had Trey McBride, obviously had a big game, so it helps his numbers, but he was a top 20 tight end. Last week, he put up 20 points. Michael Wilson also had a fair share of weeks where he was pretty solid, right? And obviously, he's going to a team with much better weapons. We're talking downgrades. I would downgrade it, of course, because you're going from Kirk Cousins to Josh Dobbs, but I think it saves a lot of seasons, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely saves seasons. And the thing is, like, we're going to have to give Dobbs some time as well. I don't think he's going to be able to just walk in and be able to get all these guys the ball. Right? I think getting Jefferson the ball will be the priority number one, obviously. So much is left. I'm curious to know how much is left for TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, right? I think Addison might end up being the odd man out if we're picking anyone. There were some accuracy issues with Dobbs. Cousins was putting the ball in these guys, right? He's an accurate quarterback. Addison, over the last 4 weeks, according to Fantasy Life's utilization report, catchable target rate from Cousins to Addison, 86%, 80%, 80%, 88%. To Hawkinson, 88%, 88%, 100%, 78%. If we look at Hollywood from Dobbs the last 4 weeks, 55%, 55%, 60%, and then 88% this last week. Zach, is this a good time to sell Addison?
It's the only time to sell Addison. And I'm going to agree with Christian here. I think Josh Dobbs coming in, I think the save the season is true, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to say it salvages the seasons of a lot of players. You know what I mean? There's not it's not like we're going to turn around and they're going to be the same guys that were with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. You have to strongly consider moving on from Addison at this point, even with the Vikings adding Josh Dobbs. And for me, it comes down to the question of upside moving forward. Sure, could Jaren Hall come in, play pretty well for the Vikings, support Addison as a fantasy relevant wide receiver 2 for the next few weeks? Maybe. If that doesn't work, could Josh Dobbs eventually start and make Addison wide receiver 2? That's probably the trajectory that we're looking at right now. Dobbs will be starting in a couple of weeks. Could that happen where Addison's a wide receiver 2 with him? We saw him do it with Marquise Brown, like you said. I think there's definitely a possibility there. But Addison's the PPR wide receiver 7 over the past 4 weeks. He's scored 5 touchdowns in his past 4 games. He's averaged 20 points a game. That ceiling is only possible with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. And I'm sorry, that's just not going to be achievable, those heights that Jordan Addison has seen. It's not going to happen with Dobbs or Hall at quarterback. I don't care what anybody says. Addison has made his money this season by getting in the end zone, and that upside is effectively gone with Hall and Dobbs as a potential replacements. Plus, he's been a wide receiver 1 only while Justin Jefferson has been out. Jefferson's eligible to return from IR in week 10, and at that point, I think given the worst quarterback situation and the heavy competition for targets, TJ Hawkinson too, he's still part of the picture here. We could see Addison fall back as a touchdown-dependent wide receiver 3 once Jefferson's back. And that's potentially worst case scenario. It could be really bad at this point. So you have that risk. You have 4 really solid games to sell Addison on. You mentioned those past 4 games where he's just been on it. You have to move him before it all comes crashing down. Obviously, I still love Addison in Dynasty. I think you could probably get away with buying him here. This would be a good time. But for the season in redraft leagues, you have to treat it like a blackjack table. You won a few big hands in a row. The dealer just switched. Table's about to go cold. Get up from the table while you're winning. Cash out. Move on from Jordan Addison before we see what life without Kirk Cousins looks like.
I should take that gambling advice.
Can we just take a fucking moment to awe at that amazing analogy just now? Bravo!
That was awesome.
Bravo, Zach! Bravo!
Very
Bravo.
good. Very impressive. Very impressive. I wish I had that. I wish I had that same mentality at the blackjack table. I'm almost the
don't
opposite.
Either. That's an ideal. Definitely
Guys,
an ideal.
a dealer changed. And we've been losing. Let's just stay. We've been winning. Let's just stay here.
We've been winning.
I want to touch on this backfield just for completeness sake. The only way Alexander Madison's value increases if he's targeted more in the passing game. Not something that we saw with Dobbs in Arizona, and Madison isn't really a target earner. So, this offense is going to get worse. I think we all agree on that. So I don't see any benefit to this backfield, even if they go a little bit more run heavy. Especially given how inefficient this backfield has been, right?
Yeah, I agree.
For now, though, it's Jaron Hall at quarterback against the Falcons this week. Jordan Addison's going to be like a wide receiver 3 start for me. I'm starting Hawkinson as I normally would. Justin Jefferson is first eligible to return next week in Week 10. By the way, the Cardinals on the other side still haven't decided who they're going to start this week. It's either going to be Kyler Murray or it's going to be who's the other guy?
Clayton Tune. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be Clayton Tune. And then it's going to be Kyler for the rest of the season after this week.
That's what I'm hoping for. Guys, if you're not following the podcast on your podcast app, please take out 2 seconds to do that now. It would mean the world to us. It helps us out more than you know. So if you can also leave a 5-star review, if you like the podcast, if you enjoy the show, that would be amazing as well. Some more really, really, really exciting trade deadline action. The Lions traded for Donovan Peoples-Jones. He was very fantasy relevant last year before they brought in Elijah Moore to steal away targets that he's not doing anything with anyway. But this is an interesting move to me. I know Marvin Jones stepped away from football, and maybe you look at that as a Marvin Jones replacement. But you kind of look at how unproductive Jameson Williams has been so far this year. Like you look at the fact that he hasn't had more than 50% route participation at all this year. DBJ plays that perimeter wide receiver role as a field stretcher, right? Am I thinking too much into this, Christian? Or does this move potentially keep Jameson Williams a part-time player the rest of the year?
To be honest with you, Jameson Williams, for a guy that gets talked about from a fantasy perspective so much, you'd expect him to be more fantasy relevant, right? But we're talking about a guy that, again, you look at the 4 games that he's been back, he's only had 15 total targets, right? He's not getting the ball a whole lot. So is this a Jameson Williams replacement? I don't really know if that's what I want to call it. Donovan Peoples-Jones, if we're talking just pure numbers, right? Jameson Williams hasn't had a time in his career when he's put up at least numbers like Donovan Peoples-Jones did last year with the Browns, right? I know obviously this year Elijah Moore came in, stole targets from him. Like you mentioned, he's not doing much with those targets, but I think he could play a role in this offense, right? It's clear the Lions want more from Jameson Williams, and he hasn't given it to him. It's been sort of a head scratcher of a career to start for. This is a guy that was such a highly touted prospect coming out of Alabama. But dare I say it's an upgrade over him, at least for the short term. I think they can coexist because I think, again, Donovan Peoples-Jones is coming in more for the Marvin Jones replacement as a direct replacement for Jameson Williams, but I think they're going to play similar roles in the offense. And if I'm talking about a guy that I'd rather own going forward in redraft leagues, obviously, dare I say it's crazy to say Donovan Peoples-Jones might be the guy that I'd rather have?
Zach, no context. Who is more fantasy relevant in 1 month, DPJ or Jameson Williams?
I'm going with Jameson Williams. And I hate to take away from everything that Chris just said. I look at his offense.
No.
Sure.
No context.
Sure.
No.
Okay. No context.
I like that though. Again, no, but he has the talent. He has the talent to, right? He has the talent to be more fantasy relevant. It's just from a guy that's so talented, you still haven't seen it yet. It's it's like we're waiting for it.
I want to hear it now because Zach has.
Go ahead. Yeah, he does.
Right, I'm gonna say this. If we're talking about Donovan Peoples-Jones stepping into this Lions offense, into that Marvin Jones role, Marvin Jones, is that what you're projecting? That he steps into the Marvin Jones role? Well, I look at Josh Reynolds has been pretty productive already.
Yeah.
ahead of him. I think Josh Reynolds is going to be more productive. He's going to get more targets than Donovan Peoples-Jones coming in. Granted, they traded for him, but I just don't think that he's going to overtake Josh Reynolds.
So I think Chris, you would agree with that as well, right? So I think the clear pecking order here is like at wide receiver is like Amon-Ra, and then Josh Reynolds, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
then now this
100%.
third wide receiver role right now is a rotation between Jameson Williams and Khalif Raymond. Right, so it would be we're kind of talking about that. I would say like more so than like the depth.
Yeah, Donovan Peoples-Jones is that's why I compared the two, because they're gonna be fighting for snaps, right? And it's from someone that owns Jameson Williams in a lot of leagues and in dynasty leagues more. Like it's just so frustrating, because it's like this guy is so talented, but he hasn't been able to put it together, right? So. I mean, maybe it's a little harsh to say, oh, yeah, I'd probably have Donovan Peoples-Jones over him. But I genuinely think that if we're talking about who's going to do more with their opportunity, I don't know if it's crazy to
I guess
say,
the question is...
I think it's going to be done.
I guess the question is, like, I would say, like, let's say DPJ is able to beat Khalif Raymond out, right, at some point, right? And, like...
Which he should be able to
and now
do.
I agree. And then now he's going to potentially compete with Jameson Williams for snaps and routes.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? I think, like, that's kind of, like, what we're getting at here, right? Right, Zach?
Yeah.
So, like, do you think that he ends up doing that? And then if that's the case, like, does he end up being more productive than Jameson Williams, right? I guess that's what it comes down to.
And but they're both probably not going to be, like, crazy fantasy relevant anyways. But
yeah, I love how this is gonna like has zero impact on anybody. Like
nobody's. Jameson Williams only owned in like 20% of the leagues. Anyway.
Since this move happened, did anyone fucking pick up DPJ on your base league?
No, probably not. Probably not.
If you read our newsletter, I put it out. My 2 cents went out on that news bit when I talked about DPJ going to the Lions, and I said, you probably aren't picking up Donovan Peoples-Jones. He might contribute down the stretch, but that time is not now. So maybe the Lions have a bye coming up in a couple weeks. Maybe things turn around. Maybe they added him. They want to incorporate him in the offense. But I think the bottom line here is we're talking about the Lions wide receiver 3, who hasn't been productive at all, because you have Sam Laporta. He's the number 2 option, even over Josh Reynolds. There's so many weapons here. Yeah, and Jahmyr Gibbs. I would love to have Jahmyr Gibbs continue to do that. But I'm just like, he goes from the Browns, who were a crowded offense with a pretty tough situation at quarterback, to a good situation at quarterback, but still a really crowded offense. I don't think I'm going to be picking him up or trusting him in my lineup anytime soon.
I would keep an eye on him, though, because I don't think it's going to be sort of one of these situations where they don't use him, because it's an in-season trade, right? And I think that's most important part. Like, if you're trading draft capital for a guy in the middle of the season, you're more than likely going to use him in some component, or a skill set that he does, right?
I could definitely see a world where in a month he's more fantasy relevant than Josh Reynolds too. I could see that. I mean, look at what he did last year with Jacoby
It's
Brissett.
Bold, but
is it though? Is Josh Reynolds really that good?
Like, really I don't know. You're right. Like, he's not like special.
By the way,
he's nothing special.
Once we're done talking about this topic, Mike, our producer, like, can you just cut this whole thing out of the podcast? Like, I appreciate it. So basically, like, last year, 61 catches for 839 yards. I don't think what's the best season Josh Reynolds has ever put up. Let's see. He had a 600 yard season in 2020, and that was his best season so far. So like I think that it's definitely possible. It's a scenario that could happen. That's with Amari Cooper there too. He was competing with. Do you remember like when he was competing with Amari Cooper, and he was getting games where he was like out targeting Amari Cooper and out producing Amari Cooper last year?
Yeah.
So let's keep that in mind. Okay. But you can cut this whole segment out, Mike. I'm just kidding. All right, let's move on. Real quick, Thursday Night Football, Steelers and Titans. Kenny Pickett said he'll play, so good news for the Steelers wide receivers. Ryan Tannehill will likely be out again. We'll see Will Levis. Zach and I spoke about it on Monday's show. But Chris, how do you feel about what you saw from Will Levis on Sunday, and do you think he has a shot at being the Titans quarterback rest of the season, even when Ryan Tannehill comes back?
So I went on a huge rant about Will Levis on our podcast on Monday. I deemed him the Mayo Man. That's his new nickname now. So they're calling him the Mayo Man. And I don't know. I don't know much about Will Levis. I obviously knew that coming out super talented arm, like probably the best in the draft class by a pretty large margin. Even with Anthony Richardson, I think that Will Levis has like that serious of an arm. But to be honest with you, when I saw him make that throw to Westbrook-Akine, when he took that like 20-step drop and just sort of threw it to the back left of the end zone and just put it in a bucket, I was like, okay, I'm not going to overreact, but there's probably like 3 quarterbacks in the league that can make that throw. And I guess he's now one of them, right?
Zach Wilson, and then who's
Zach Wilson in his pro day. You're
Dobbs.
forgetting. Zach Wilson, pro day only. Pro day only. But jokes aside, seriously, like you're talking Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and I guess now Will Levis, right? Like I don't see many quarterbacks making that throw. And the fact that he was able to do that, like in the first half of his first NFL start. Now, I'm not saying Will Levis is going to be those quarterbacks, but from a Tennessee Titans standpoint, how do you go from that? Even if he puts up a dud against the Steelers on Thursday, how do you go from that and sell your fan base? Oh, we're going back to Ryan Tannehill, right? Like that's not happening. And say what you want about, I know they said, oh, Will Levis is starting because Tannehill is, they use the term still recovering from his ankle injury. That's a load of crap, right? Like he's not touching his job. He's not coming back, right?
And it's a high ankle sprain too, right? It's not like this normal ankle sprain or ankle
right?
like turn where he's like he can't come in. Like no, this is going to be a situation. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen on Thursday night.
Yeah.
And by the way,
I'm all in on him, to be honest.
All right, let's get into some buys and sells. I'll get into my first buy here, and that's David Montgomery. Okay, everybody who has Jahmyr Gibbs is going to hate me, and I think I do anticipate Gibbs to have a bigger role when Monty is back than he did earlier in the year. Okay, so I do anticipate that. You don't have that type of impact in 2 games and then just get relegated back to an almost insignificant role, right? However, I think there are a lot of questions in this backfield as to how it will be deployed moving forward. And I think after these 2 games that Gibbs had, especially on national television, I think a lot of people think that Montgomery took a real hit here, and that we're not going to see the same role for him when he's back. But I do think, at the very least, Montgomery is still going to be the primary rusher. He's still going to be the goal line guy. I think that part's obvious. But I think that's enough. Like, that's all he needs. Like, we saw Jamal Williams do it last year. Montgomery has already cashed all of my overs on his season touchdown props for me, right? And look at the schedule coming up after their bye when Montgomery is scheduled to come back. Chargers, Chicago, Green Bay, New Orleans, okay. But then Chicago, Denver after that, again. Those are 5 bottom 10 fantasy matchups for running backs in 6 weeks. Zach, I think he's going to be a high-end RB2 the rest of the way.
Yeah, he has to be. And I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I love what we've seen these past 2 weeks, but it's just not going to continue. And I know people are going to hate you for it. You said people are going to hate you for it, but this is the reality. Sometimes the truth hurts, and this is what's going to happen with Dave Montgomery. They're not going to just pull him out and not use him anymore. They're not just going to turn to Jahmyr Gibbs like they wouldn't do for Dave Montgomery. Look at Dave Montgomery. He scored those touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs, in the games that he's had these big games, he's had these big games these past 2 weeks, he's had trouble kind of at the goal line. He's had some goal line carries close to the goal line in the red zone where he just doesn't really do a whole lot. His score came from 27 yards out, and he had another long score against the Ravens the week before that. So I don't think that this is a situation where Jahmyr Gibbs is going to take over those touches. Dave Montgomery is going to come back. It's easy to forget Dave Montgomery now that we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs do this, but the Lions aren't going to forget what they have with Dave Montgomery. And honestly, it seems like Dave Montgomery fits the type of offensive philosophy Dan Campbell has a little bit more than Jahmyr Gibbs, even though Jahmyr Gibbs, electric, fantastic player. But Dave Montgomery, the ground and pound, just we're going to come at you 3 run plays in a row in the red zone. We're going to give it to Dave Montgomery every time. That's not going to go away. I think Dave Montgomery has that floor, like you mentioned. I think the floor is an RB2. I think the upside, he'll have RB1 weeks still the rest of the way. He only needs to score 2 touchdowns. You mentioned we saw it from Jamal Williams. So I'm in on that one. I think you should definitely buy him, especially if his manager, whoever has Dave Montgomery, is thinking, uh-oh, well, here comes Jahmyr Gibbs. And there's right now speculation about Jahmyr Gibbs' role. How big could it be? Once we find out what that's going to be, that trouble, all that worrying about it disappears. You know what you have. So you have to take advantage of not knowing what you have yet with Dave Montgomery. I have my own buy. Not a running back, but it's a wide receiver. And it's Keenan Allen. Now, He could have had a bigger game against the Bears Sunday, but the Chargers ran away with that one like they were supposed to against Tyson Bagent. No one was expecting that to be a really close game. They didn't need to push the ball downfield. The good news for you, if you're looking to buy Keenan Allen, and you should, his production has cooled all the way down from the beginning of the season, but his target share hasn't at all. When you split up Allen's 8 games played this season in the first 4 and the last 4, he has the same target share in both of those time spans. 29% target share in weeks 1 through 4, another 29% target share in weeks 5 through 8. He is consistent. That is exactly what you want to see. That's with Austin Eckler having been back these past 3 weeks, and that's with Mike Williams playing in those first 3 games of the season. So players have been in and out of the lineup. Things have changed on the Chargers offense. Keenan Allen is still getting those targets. Using those same splits when we talk about production, we find that Allen, he was averaging 25.8 PPR points per game through weeks 1 through 4. That placed him as a wide receiver 2 in that time span. But in weeks 5 through 8, these past 4, he's down to just 15.3 points per game, which places him as a wide receiver 31 in that span. So we've said this many times before. I've said this many times before, and you probably get tired of hearing it. But Keenan Allen is Justin Herbert's favorite target. That's who he throws to. His production dip that we're seeing is going to correct itself soon enough. Austin Eckler just had a big game too. He had almost 100 yards receiving and a touchdown against the Bears. So you can take advantage of anyone that opens up the game log. They see 2 straight quiet games for Keenan Allen, and then they start to panic when they see that, Allen's game came with a side order of a big game for Austin Eckler. Like, he might not be cheap to go after. He's not necessarily someone that you're buying low. You're just buying him without the ceiling right now. He hasn't had the ceiling the past 2 weeks. He hasn't hit it. But I think if you can move a guy like Jordan Addison for him in some sort of package deal, we just talked about him earlier in the show, I think he'd be in pretty good shape.
I mean, you want to talk about almost stealing my potential buy. I'm all over Keenan Allen. I like how you brought him up. Again, I notice when you look at Keenan Allen at face value, he's from a target standpoint, he's getting the ball, or at least getting the opportunity as much as he did early on in the year when he was going off, right? Clearly, him and Herbert just haven't been able to connect, but I fully expect that to correct itself. I'm buying the heck out of Keenan Allen, to be honest. I think he's a potential league winner, even if you have to pay an expensive price to get him. I think this is a guy that a lot of people are looking at what he did early on in the year, and you're looking at a dip of production, but they don't look beneath the face value stats. Suggests that he's a fantastic buy. So I couldn't agree more. My buy is also a receiver, and I'm going with DJ Moore. Again, this is a guy that hasn't had his quarterback one, his QB1, Justin Fields, been sidelined with a dislocated thumb. I expect him to be back shortly, but the longer he's out, the cheaper DJ Moore's price gets. So you look at DJ Moore, you look at his last 4 games with Justin Fields, he was putting up 16 fantasy points, 13 fantasy points, 27 and 49. He went 6 catches for 104 yards against Tampa. He went 8 catches for 131 against Denver, and another 8 catches for 230 on that massive big game against Washington on Thursday night. And then now you look at his numbers with Bagent, he's still getting the ball target from a target perspective. He's still seeing 8-9 targets a game, but obviously the talent level at quarterback just isn't the same, right? Now, when you look at a potential buy, you want someone that's seeing a lot of opportunity. And I think DJ Moore still is, and there's no indication that that's going to change anytime soon. If anything, it's going to get better when Justin Fields comes back. I'm buying the heck out of DJ Moore. I think he's, honestly, you could probably get him for wide receiver 2 price right now. I think he's going to be a serious wide receiver 1 down the stretch once he gets his quarterback back. Once that wrap, which you saw, you take away that first game, I think he had like 4 fantasy points. You take away that first game, he was putting up serious numbers with Justin Fields, and I expect that to immediately come back as soon as Justin Fields steps back on the field.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. I do think that, this past week, it was definitely a tougher week, for Chicago. But at the same time, like, I do like the fact that Tyson Bagent, is at least putting, on target, he's putting it on target for DJ Moore for the most part. Now, he's not being targeted down the field and that sort of thing, and that's okay. I'm not overly worried about it. But I do think that once Justin Fields comes back, like you said, he could be absolute monster, right?
Yeah.
I fucking lost all my notes. I lost all my notes. Like, all of it's gone. I'm like, hold on a second. I'm just fucking... Sorry, Mike. Mike's like, fuck, I had no work to do. Now I got so much work to do.
You
There we
digging
go.
deep into the
There we
stats.
go. We're back. Woo! I thought I deleted it. I thought it was in my recently deleted. I don't know how the fuck that happened, but like it just like vanished. So like recently deleted. All right, here we go. We're back. We're back, guys. I was making no sense to your Justin Fields rebuttal. Response there. I was like, yeah. DJ Moore, so good, DJ Moore. I love him. So good. All right, so let's get into the sells now. All right, my first sell, my only sell for this episode is Gus Edwards. He was the overall RB6 and the overall RB3 in the last 2 weeks. That is so far from where he's going to be finishing most weeks. You kind of have to take advantage of this peak value if you can. It took a touchdown and 1 80-yard reception in week 7. It took 3 touchdowns last week in a great matchup against Arizona. Now he has Seattle this week, who've allowed the lowest yards per carry to running backs this season. Another tough overall matchup against the Browns the following week, in which he averaged 3.2 yards per carry in his last game against them earlier this year. He is a touchdown-dependent early down back. Similar to David Montgomery, who I wanted to buy, but we know exactly what the Lions like to do when they get down near the goal line. Completely different situation, and we have a 2-year sample of that. Now, the positives for Gus is that he is slowly taking over that backfield. Like, there's no real ambiguity here at this point who the primary early down guy is in the backfield at this point, right? There's no ambiguity over who the goal line back is, at this point as well, right? 100% of their attempts inside the 5-yard line over the last 2 games has been to Gus Edwards. Okay, so he is a legit like low-end RB2 at this point. Like, you can start him every single week. But he's just not an RB1 like he's finished over the last 2 weeks. The game scripts against the Lions and Cardinals were perfect for him. So if I can trade him now for like a solid wide receiver 2 maybe, right, or use him in a package to get a more high-end player, maybe somebody more dependable, I would do that.
Yeah, for me, I agree with this take 100%. It's about capitalizing on the value that you have right now. Past 2 weeks look like RB1 production. We know that he's not an RB1. The touchdowns have been there, and that's what's got him there. But that's not going to be the case every single week. I think this is a perfect call right here. Could Gus Edwards be an RB2 the rest of the way? Yeah, I think so. But the ceiling that we've seen isn't going to be there every week the rest of the way. And I'm pretty much echoing what you just said. I'm in on this completely. He was one of the guys that I was thinking about selling too. But you mentioned those tough matchups coming up. There's no reason to hang on to him, especially if you can move him and get someone better. So I'm with you on that one. But I have another sell, and it's not a running back again. It's a wide receiver, and it's DeVonta Smith. And this one seems easy, but it's definitely something. Just because the deal is easy doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. You know what I'm saying? DeVonta Smith, this isn't an indictment on him as a receiver. DeVonta Smith is a very good receiver. He's a very good piece on any offense. It just happens that he's playing opposite of A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown is dominating. No other number 2 receiver would be able to compete with the production that Brown has had these past 6 weeks. And it's going to be, was it 7 weeks? I'm not even sure. It was 6 weeks where he has a 125 yards receiving streak. But guess what? DeVonta Smith, he just gifted you a sell window with 99 yards and a touchdown. The Eagles had a great matchup against the Commanders in week 9. Both A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith were able to come through. But that's just not going to be the case every single week. We've seen that the past 5 weeks. Since week 3, A.J. Brown, he has a 32% target share to DeVonta Smith's 20%. These numbers courtesy of Fantasy Life's utilization report. 48% air yard share to Smith's 26% air yard share. And he's averaging 27 points per game to DeVonta Smith's 10. So for comparison's sake, last year, A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith, they were earning 28 and 27% target shares respectively. Smith has finished outside the weekly top 15 in 6 of his 8 games this year. There's going to be more of that where that came from. Look ahead to his schedule in the next 4 weeks, too. The Eagles have Dallas in week 9, a bye in week 10, and then back-to-back matchups against Kansas City and Buffalo. Dallas and Kansas City, they're both top 5 in fewest fantasy points allowed to receivers this season. And then he's going to have his bye. He's not going to be able to do anything for you in that game either. So moving on from player before their bye is never a bad thing. The odds of Smith having another game like he had against the Commanders over the next few weeks, pretty darn low. So take advantage of this selling opportunity before you're stuck again with Smith, putting up single digits on a weekly basis. There's a chance he could be relegated to your flex. I don't want to say your bench, but if A.J. Brown's going to keep playing like this, which it looks like that's going to be the case, Jalen Hurts has completely switched the way he's targeting these receivers this season compared to last season. I think you definitely need to take advantage of this. Sell him now because he's not going to have this type of value. You're pretty much cutting your losses with this one.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in every single thing you said there, right? With the emergence of A.J. Brown, he's not going to slow down anytime soon. And again, it was a struggle to sell DeVonta Smith outside of before last week. And again, he posted a great stat line. So the the sell window is now open. I'm considering selling him wherever I got him. I think again his role clearly take a backseat to AJ Brown, respectfully so though. Like we're talking, he's breaking records here, so I don't think they're gonna necessarily stop targeting him at the rate that they are because it's clearly working. He's single handedly winning them some games. But yeah, I think he's a perfect sell coming off that 99-yard performance for sure. My sell isn't someone that's necessarily coming off any type of big performances as of recent. He's more so a guy that I'm trying to capitalize on the name value that he holds. And it pains me to say this as a Cowboy fan, but I'm selling Tony Pollard. It's clear the Cowboys' run game just is not what it was last year. Say what you want. Maybe it's Tony Pollard being better fit in a complementary role because he had Zeke Elliott last year, but you look at his most recent production. He in his last 4 games, he's gone less than 9 fantasy points in PPR formats. In PPR formats in 3 of his last 4 games, right? So we're talking super low production here. Obviously, is that the floor? Probably. But the ceiling necessarily hasn't been there either, right? You watch the Cowboys, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that they can't really run the ball. And there might be people out there that still see Tony Pollard as that RB1, elite RB1 that he was drafted. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be that this year. So maybe you'll be able to capitalize on that and sell him, try and make your team stronger, maybe trade him for an RB2 and a wide receiver 2, sort of try and trade him for 2 guys, make your team a little stronger, because I genuinely think that the better days of Tony Pollard from a fantasy perspective are behind us. Just looking at the scheme and the way the Cowboys offense is run, it just there's nothing there from a running the ball perspective.
He is one of the most, I think, one of the guys I'm torn on the most, right? These game scripts have been so weird, right, for the Cowboys. Yep. Like one game they're completely dominating and Rico Dowdle's getting
That's
like
Cowboys
5 carries, right? Or they're getting like blown out, right? Or they're playing against a tough, like there's a lot of weird stuff going on. CeeDee Lamb, like, he had like 2 great games this year, right? And it's like, all right, well, is that coming back down? Like, what's going to happen this week, right? And then you have a tough Philly matchup this week, right? Not an easy matchup for running backs. Like, what happens there? So it is a little bit confusing. I will say, though, that I tend to agree with you. That I think Tony Pollard is somebody that if you can get a more actual RB1 for him, I'll do it 1 for 1.
Yeah.
Like, give me Kenneth Walker, right? Give me DeAndre Swift, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, these guys were not RB1s, right, like several weeks ago, but they are now. And Tony Pollard is still being viewed as one. Tony Pollard's probably more of an RB2 at this point.
I agree.
And, and it's tough. He's an RB2 with upside. Like, that's kind of how I'm viewing him at this point.
Because his upside's like crazy, but he's just not utilized.
You look at his volume. Like, his volume just hasn't been there at all. Like, in weeks 2 and 3, he's had some high volume games. He's had a lot of targets, like in that Chargers game. It's kind of up and down. Now, here's the thing with Pollard, right? Don't sell him if you're not getting that RB1 value back or that high-end wide receiver 2 value back. Because the name value is so big that you'll be selling him short, number 1. And number 2, is there a chance that Tony Pollard, ends up coming through at some point? Like, I think there is a chance, right?
I hope so.
Once these games stabilize a little bit more and, they get into more competitive games with not as bad matchups, right? Where he's very involved in the game plan. Right?
Yeah.
We haven't seen those games in a while. So when that happens, we could see a lot of usage out of him. So we'll see what happens. It's a tough one, but if you can get the value, I think I would do it. If you guys are looking for our rankings, you can find that at upperhandfantasy.com. You can also sign up for our free daily newsletter as well that people seem to are really enjoying. You can sign up on our website for that as well. Christian, we really appreciate you joining. This was a lot of fun. You can find Christian at Catch the Bliss on Instagram. You can also find his podcast by searching for The CTB Show, or you can just search Catch the Blitz as well on your podcast app for their weekly show. Christian, appreciate you, man.
Thank you, guys. I really had a great time. I hope we were able to do this again. Maybe I'll get you guys on my show one day, but I had a blast. Thank you again. And I hope you guys have better fantasy luck than I have had in recent weeks.
That's going to do it for us today, guys. I'll be back tomorrow to talk quarterbacks and running backs. See ya.